things like Housing First, along with other sorts of ways of working, were a really important way that they thought they could start to end homelessness in Scotland. So a really exciting development there. So what we've got going on in Scotland is a Housing First Scotland programme, where 5 cities, it's about £3 million, are starting to look at how do they make this change from traditional housing and homelessness services to ones that actually also incorporate Housing First. So they're just about to start that process. That's really exciting. Seeing 5 cities that actually then will share their learning quite quickly with the rest of the country.
OK, so how does it work?
So what they're doing is they first of all need to really understand homelessness and what's happening in each of those cities. They're bringing together people that sometimes have worked very well, organisations, local authorities, the NHS, to say, how do we need to work differently? So which bit is working well that we're going to keep, and which bits are not working for people? Why are there still rough sleepers out on our streets? And they're coming up with local plans. And one of the big things that always comes up is, well, we need access to more housing. If we're going down a Housing First route, where do we find these affordable, secure housing? And they're going to be doing that in a variety of ways. There isn't, even £3 million isn't a simple answer when you're looking at affordable housing, but it is a really important starting place.
I should say, and we'll bring it back to the studio. Be back with you in a minute, Louise. For those that are watching this in different countries, the National Health Service is the NHS. That is the one that we all pay for and is supposedly free at the point of delivery from birth to death. Supposedly. We will ask about that. Are you excited by what you're hearing?
Any initiative that addresses homelessness is an exciting initiative. And we have a lot to learn from the way that other countries approach homelessness. I think we have to be open about that. In a way we learn the best practice that other countries pursue. So, yeah, any initiative is exciting.
And what about well, you've discovered that between October, I think it was, last year and January, February of this year, 100 extra people, in addition to the 449 that you had already reported on, had died on the streets of Britain. Is it your belief, there's no definitive proof on this one, is it your belief that were a scheme like this in place, those people who you identified by names, it was an extraordinary piece of journalism because there were pictures as well, there were their life stories, that many of them would be alive today?
I think it could be a really important intervention. I mean, the fact that people are dying physically on the streets or in hospitals or in hostels, you know, all of that would go away overnight if they were in this Housing First model and services knew where they were and could be working with them, because that's often the issue, is people kind of dropping through the gaps of the provision that exists. In some cases, you know, there were people that died whose bodies were found in tents, decomposed to the state that they needed dental records or DNA records to identify them. When people are dying like that, you know, in 21st century Britain, something is going wrong.
Almost within plain sight.
Yeah, you know, hidden away behind a hedgerow next to a path where people are walking by every day. But for whatever reason, services are not engaging with them. And, yeah, I think it can only help if those people are inside with a roof over their head with the wraparound services that Louise has been talking about.
You talked about lessons that have been learned through the work that you and others have done on the deaths of homeless people.
Yeah.
Give me a bit more on that.
I think almost one of the most shocking things off the project we did at the Bureau of Investigative Journalism was that nobody else was doing that count. You know, I spent a couple of weeks back in early 2018 ringing around coroners' offices, hospitals, police forces, and everybody said, oh, we don't count how many people are dying homeless, but somebody else will. And it took a couple of weeks of doing that to realise that actually nobody was. Another thing we looked into is when a homeless person dies, there is a mechanism by which people can learn lessons for what happened, which is called a safeguarding adult review, which councils would do if a vulnerable child died or an elderly person died, to see, you know, were the services working with them, what the kind of access points they had to those were. But we found out that those just simply weren't happening for...
And am I right in saying that a government body, if not the government itself, but a government body, I think it's the Office for National Statistics, has now taken up the work that you're doing because they believed it was so important?
Yeah, that's right. So we opened up our database to the Office for National Statistics, and they used that to develop a methodology, and then in December just gone they produced for the first time their own official figures on homeless deaths, which showed a huge increase, 24% in 5 years, of people dying homeless.
Now, let's talk about those who fall between the cracks. Let's talk a little bit more about the shelter that you run. It happens to be in a mosque. What is the turnaround of different people? You have, what, 12 to 14 there at any one
So
time?
we have
Are they always the same people?
15 guests that we have. The turnaround last year, we moved on 60 into permanent housing and they still continue to use the day centre for support. This year, the numbers have dropped.
60 out of how many?
60 out of 80, actually.
So 20 didn't get this help.
And
do you know what's happened to them, or have they just
They are still
disappeared?
working with the day centres to find out how to move on to permanent housing.
So these people haven't disappeared?
No, they haven't disappeared, and they still access the day centre services day in, day out, and work with their key workers to move on. Going
back to the original point that was raised a little bit earlier and addressing your point as well, is the one about stigma. Is the stigma that comes with being homeless. Yeah. And I think that explains partly what you were saying about people being found behind hedges, hidden away. There's a whole stigma, and it's not just people sleeping on the street. In our research, we found out that, of students, we found out that none of them had actually approached the university services for help, and none of them had talked to their friends, and most of them had not talked to their families about being homeless. And given the fact there's so many people are homeless, it's interesting that people feel some shame in it, and it's wrong to feel shame in it.
I'm going to bring up a particular case that I read about in researching for this programme, but it's interesting that, yes, there is shame felt, but there's also an element of self-protection in this one. I don't know whether you've read about it. There was a local councillor in Wales, in Cardiff, who said, let's get these tents off the street. And she was vilified for what she said. But a number of homeless people said, actually, we don't want to move into hostels because we think that we are in more danger there from drug abuse and from falling in with the wrong crowd. So we've got a wrong approach in that area as well, haven't we?
Yeah. I mean, the obvious thing there is to make hostels safer rather than clearing
But
people.
Why are they perhaps places of danger?
Because they're trying to pack in as many people as possible into these spaces without the right individuals looking after those hostels either. They're trying to... And I would agree with a lot of those guests as well. I would never want to be in a room full of about 100 people that you don't even know. That's safeguarding yourself as well as the volunteers around you. It's quite a difficult thing to do. And also in London, it is very easy to be homeless, actually, because there is always food provisions out there. There's soup kitchens left, right and centre in London. There's day centres that are where you can have showers. So students in your university, I can see how they go through terms without even telling anyone that they are homeless because there's so much provision out there that you can kind of get away with it.
Louise, other than instituting the kind of programmes that you've seen and which you believe to be accessible, is there something else that needs to be done immediately to perhaps set the foundations for a better system in this country?
I think there are several things. I mean, I would like just to pick up on one point there from that conversation, and I think, Maeve mentioned it, and Salma mentioned it, and Patrick as well. About these are people who are homeless. They know what they need. They know what they've tried before, and they know what hasn't worked. And so one of the cool things we do on our campaign, and has been mentioned there, is that we go out and talk to people. So not just counting heads, but actually spending time with people. Hundreds of volunteers from local communities going out saying, we want to make a difference in our community, sitting with someone who's homeless and saying, tell me. We have very structured forms, but at the same time, it's actually about understanding who that person is and what they actually need. And I think any government policy, any work that any NGO or other communities do has to come from that starting point of what's happening locally and what do homeless people actually
I know they
need.
are all individuals and therefore each story is going to be different, but are there common themes running through what you hear?
Yeah, well, I mean, some of the things we've talked about, and I think, it was amazing, to hear Maeve talking about the work that she's done, is actually one of the big problems we have is that we don't know, that there aren't, across Europe, but even across the UK, if you start looking at statistics, we don't fully know the size of the problem. We don't fully know what's happening in certain places. We're not projecting what issues are coming up and how we're actually going to deal with them. So there is a really big issue around data and actually understanding what works and what doesn't work so that we can make sure that we're doing the right thing.
So is that common to all of Europe, the fact that nobody really knows?
Yeah, it's a massive issue. There's lots of, people don't even directly count. We don't have full agreements on what do we mean by homelessness. So in different countries, they'll have different ideas about what you have, what your circumstances are to mean that you're actually homeless. So it's very different to try and compare it across countries, really. I mean, the other thing I would say in terms of what's missing is that absolute belief, and it's been expressed here by everyone, I think, is that street homelessness and homelessness itself is wrong, and that actually we can do something about it. There are countries that are showing us that it can happen. There are communities that are showing us that they can make this change. And that fundamental commitment to that from policy, from businesses, from communities, that we can change this.
Just a quick thought, we will come back to you, but just a quick thought. How much more do you think it costs the Finland taxpayer to fund for this admirable project, so that we can put that into context about how difficult it would be politically for a party to sell this idea?
Well, I don't have any of those figures on me, but what I can tell you is that over time it's cheaper. It's much, much cheaper to house people in accommodation, provide the services, and it works. Now, in terms of if you were to come back to this and we could look at some of the cities where they're doing this, there's actually quite a lot of research where they will actually try and work out, based on the current homeless population, based on all of those services. So the emergency services that you've talked about in terms of Selma, and communities actually themselves providing provision, because there's massive gaps, all the efforts and money that they're putting in, all the way up to the police, the National Health Service, the probation, crime, all of that money being spent because we're not doing it the right way, as opposed to how much it actually costs to provide housing and those services where we know where people are.
What about this one? And I'll put this one to you, Patrick. Anybody can come in on it. There is an element of you have to provide affordable housing if you are a developer, but it's a very small element.
Yes.
What if it was, if you want to make 10 million out of this particular project, you have to provide 50% of it as affordable housing, in other words, local authority housing or whatever you want to call it, that would be available. Would that be enough, or would a first step?
It's a step. I know what the developers would say.
Well, of course they would say, well, look, we're not going to build the houses, but that's their business. They are going to build the houses.
It is, but I think the way to look at it is not constantly trying to lever in a little bit of money here and where people are developing, having a few there. It's really putting some investment in, and it really is an investment. It will pay back if we do it. Over 40 years, you'll pay back your investment. So it's actually putting money in at the start and not kind of... It's fine to get developers to do that, but it's a relatively small-scale approach to the problem.
Okay, so
you actually did an investigation into that and found, because there are those kind of percentages in contract.
I just made that one up, but
it's not 50%, but it's something. But what happens?
It's 10%.
It's something, and then the contracts get signed, and then once they're signed, the developer goes to the council and says, "Look, we've reassessed. It's too expensive." So either we wash our hands and walk away, or
do you know what happens then? Because this has happened where I live. Is that the developer then says, "I tell you what, I'll do. I'll give you £100,000 for you to build a playground for the children instead, and we'll just let that when they say thank you very much because they're happy to have £100,000. But here's another point. We are a small island with an awful lot of people on it. Even if in the United Kingdom we build 3 million houses a year for the next 10 years, is that going to solve the problem?
Well,
more and more people are coming in.
Well, they've quantified it and done a lot of research into it, and it's about 300,000 a year is a generally accepted figure.
300,000, sorry, I said 3 million, I meant 300,000.
No, that's fine. 3 million would be fantastic. But 300,000 would be adequate.
You wouldn't be able to sleep at night for the building noise.
But certainly 300,000 would do it, and it's not beyond the government to do that. We've done it, not since the 1970s, but we have done that before. So it is a matter of political will and what choices you make.
And we made the point in the previous programme that there are buildings sitting empty all across the UK, whole swathes of London where there's empty buildings. So it's not for a lack of properties, it's just who owns them, controls those properties, and whether housing benefits which have been frozen for a period are not keeping up with private rents. So people that are on housing benefits just cannot find anywhere that they can rent on that amount.
Your work must be a bit depressing, but it must also be extraordinary to look into this and think that you're bringing it to the attention of so many people.
Yeah, it's gratifying to do, but it's traumatic to read day in, day out stories of people that could be my friends, could be me, could be my mother, could be my father. In our database there's stories like a guy who at one point almost had a research position with Stephen Hawking. He was a very clever physicist, ended up living in his car and dying in a hotel. A woman who, mother to 4 kids, loving mother, ended up dying in a doorway. Reading these stories day in, day out is, yeah, it's so...
Well, intellect is no guarantee of not falling into the poverty trap. And you must see that. I mean, some of the people you meet at the night shelter.
I see it.
Extraordinary. You must just think, how? Why?
Yep. I see it day in, day out. Last year we had some ex-Sudanese national footballers as part of my shelter and that was just mind-boggling for me to see that. And also, I think the drive that these individuals have to move on, that's what gets me to carry on working away at this, because you know that the little that you can do to help that individual move on is just...
Do you think people... I hate generalisations, but I'm going to generalise. Do you think an awful lot of people look at homeless people and think, you brought it on yourself, it's your fault?
Yes, all the time. And I think even just like a short-term fix, as I was explaining to you before, is just kind of, as you do walk past someone, it's that eye contact, it's that smile. You don't have to give money to everyone, but just acknowledgement that this is an individual, this is a human, is just the first step. And I think nowadays everyone's kind of immune to it and just walks past as like there's nothing wrong, and that's not the society, and that's not the London that I want to live in either.
Or the frustrating thing is everyone cares around Christmas, around winter when it's suddenly cold, but actually people are dying throughout.
We're doing the programme now because it's cold.
You're right, we're not going to do it in the height of summer in
it
July.
Really doesn't make much difference, does it?
We found people dying, in the height of summer, in the depths of winter, continually throughout the year.
But it's also worth saying that it's tragic that people on the street and the deaths of people on the street, but it's a small part of the homelessness problem. In London, in temporary accommodation, there's a population the size of Cambridge in London in temporary accommodation.
Which is how many people?
It's around about 135,000 people in Cambridge. So it's roughly equivalent to... So it's incredible to think that all these people in temporary accommodation, who you don't see, you don't walk past, they're the people you're on the train with coming into work.
OK, Louise, we've kept you quiet for a bit. Your turn.
Which is highly unusual. I mean, I would say, that point about, we can do something about it if we want. I mean, that's exactly what my organisation does. It looks for the communities and the organisations that are doing that. Yes, this is a problem, but we can find a solution, and it is happening.
And the Housing First project, which we've mentioned, is it likely to be replicated in a lot of other towns and cities, given the success that you say it's demonstrating?
Yeah, it has a very strong evidence base. So whether you want to go out and visit the cities where they don't have anyone sleeping rough, or you want to speak to the academics that are involved in it, or the municipalities that can show that they're saving money by actually doing this, the reality is that there is a lot of evidence out there to show that it is working, and lots of interest from cities who know and communities that know what they're doing at the moment isn't working for everyone. And as we've heard, it is the tip of the iceberg, but it's the most extreme form, and it is where people are dying throughout.
Those that know British cities, name a few of you said the places where there are no people sleeping rough.
Here, Housing First is still relatively new, so we would need to go to Finland, we would need to go to America, and then we would start to see those changes. Okay, what we're starting to see with our 13 cities is the numbers starting to come down, and elsewhere where Housing First has been in. So in Glasgow, where I explained about an organisation that have been working on it for 10 years, they're able to show the success of their tenancies. So we could look at what would happen if you didn't have Housing First, and then we look at where it's operating, and we say, actually, these people, over 80% of people who formerly people would have said they're not ready for housing, that these people have got real issues, over 80% of them are keeping their tenancies. So they're successful.
You're still working on this. You're looking at other areas. What in particular? And do you believe one day you'll be able to say, that's it, it's done, we have ended homelessness? Not we, you
Me.
in particular.
It's quite tough.
I think you know what I mean.
Yeah, I mean, part of it, I think, is that it shouldn't always fall to investigative journalist units to have to do some of this research in the data gathering. Louise made the point about knowing the evidence, having the data at your fingertips allows you to make policies that do work. But yeah, certainly issues around the kind of the access to housing, the access to different services when you are in a vulnerable place, when you're on the brink of homelessness, to try and work out what's going wrong in the prevention stages. Because, here in the UK, we had the Homelessness Reduction Act that was brought in April last year, which does put, in theory, this additional responsibility on councils to prevent people from becoming homeless. Whether that is working, whether there's more that could be done there is, I think, something to be looked into.
Well, councils aren't approachable, so that's why there's so many day centres out there, because they're the intermediary between the homeless guest and the council, and that shouldn't be the case. They should be able to go directly to the councils, and they should be made more approachable.
I want to ask you about your residents as one of the last things in the programme, but do you believe it is possible, Patrick, to end homelessness?
I think it is, yeah. I think it can end homelessness with the right priorities, the government having the right priorities, not just in terms of housing. It needs bringing a real focus and partnership to address some of the issues we've talked about between different government departments.
So, Sam, your people tonight, you'll go in, I don't know whether you'll perhaps go in to see them, but I mean, what will their tomorrow hold for them?
A lot of the time sitting in libraries, sitting on buses to stay out of the cold, possibly going to the day centre to utilise their showers, and and then coming back to another night shelter in the evening.
And it is a cycle of hopelessness, helplessness, or...?
No, it's a cycle of hope. The minute they come into that project, that's why I'm there to run my evening as hope and to keep it stable for those individuals so that they can go back in the day and try and help themselves and move themselves on.
How do you keep their spirits up?
Smiles, food, hospitality, and just a community, which is how we do it.
Yeah, and the fact that people are still talking about it, I suppose that's always good, isn't it?
Yeah.
Louise, do you see hope for the future here?
I really do. I think, your panel has kind of shown how many people are interested and how people are helping in lots of different ways, shining a spotlight, actually being there when needed in an emergency situation. I think we have lots to do, but I think people are very interested and people are talking about it, and that's incredibly important.
And people are talking about it. Are the right people listening?
I think so. Well, I think in the 13 European cities that I work with, communities have started to make that difference themselves. And quite often they've been able to get local universities involved, local communities involved. They've also been able to get the local authority involved. And in Glasgow and other places, they've been able to get the national government involved. That's
extraordinary. Well, thank you very much indeed. Louise, we appreciate your time very much. May you be bending the right ears in Whitehall and in other cities across Europe and the United Kingdom. Good luck with all of that. I know it's depressing stuff, but it's extraordinary what you managed to find out.
And actually going around the country and hearing about projects like Seema's and day centres, it does give you hope that, look, even if the system is failing, society fills the gaps and steps up.
Yeah, okay. So. Listen, thank you. Thank you very much indeed. I wish we had a bit more time, but we have given it our all. Thank you for coming in, and thank you very much for watching. I'm David Foster from the Roundtable team. We appreciate your company. Hope you can join us next time. But this has been a two-part special on homelessness. Not hopelessness, just homelessness. Bear that in mind. Goodbye for now.
Every so often, there is a moment, an image, a frame that captures an event and crystallizes history into one single shot.
It was really interesting to look at the individual faces of the police.
Inside the Lens is a new series on the world of the photojournalist, where a picture can say 1,000 words.
It's something you do for the love of documenting and telling stories.
Inside the Lens on TRT World.
Check out the new trtworld.com. Perfect for your laptop, phone or tablet.
Venezuela's president asks the American people to stop Trump from turning his country into Latin America's Vietnam. You're watching TRT World live from Istanbul. I'm Andrea Sankey. Also ahead on the program, Theresa May gets set for more talks with the EU as British MPs vote to renegotiate the Brexit deal. Colder than Antarctica, parts of the U.S. are being told not to breathe deeply and talk as little as possible in record freezing temperatures. And a day after Washington requests the extradition of a top Huawei executive, the U.S. and China resume crucial trade talks. We begin again with the latest developments in Venezuela, and President Nicolas Maduro says he is willing to hold early parliamentary elections. He's also again offered to talk with the opposition in the presence of international mediators. Maduro says U.S. sanctions against the state-owned oil company PDVSA are illegal. He accuses U.S. National Security Advisor John Bolton of orchestrating them and says the move is Bolton's craziest decision. Maduro has also appealed to the U.S. public to stop their president from interfering in Venezuela's internal affairs. Now, Maduro tweeted this to his 3.5 million followers. People of the United States, I ask for your support to reject the interference of Donald Trump's government, which aims to make my homeland a Vietnam in Latin America. Do not let him. Well, Maduro is one of two men now calling himself the Venezuelan president. The other is the self-declared leader, Juan Guaido, who's now had his bank accounts frozen and is banned from leaving the country by the Supreme Court. His representatives have met the U.S. vice president in Washington. Now, our correspondent Ezei's Tianshan reports from Caracas.
A week after Juan Guaido declared himself the interim president of Venezuela, the country's chief prosecutor has launched a criminal investigation into his anti-government activities.
We have come to the Supreme Court to request that precautionary measures take place, that while this investigation that we are doing against this citizen allow in this case, 1, the prohibition of his leaving the country, 2, the prohibition to sell real estate, 3, the freezing of his accounts.
The move hasn't stopped Guaido from appointing new ambassadors to some countries that recently recognized him. But his team is now more conscious than ever to protect him by hiding his location.
I am not underestimating the threat of jail, and I don't want them to take it that way. Very responsibly, I tell them that this is nothing new under the sun, unfortunately.
These preventive measures came only a day after the U.S. imposed new sanctions against Maduro's government and strengthened Guaido by letting him control certain Venezuelan assets that have been previously frozen in the U.S. banks. By changing the economic prospects for these two rivals, some analysts say this move could also influence the military's critical position in the ongoing standoff.
At the end of the day, the military plays a defining role here, and if you are a military official who notices that the economic and executive power is shifting from one leader to another, you are more likely to also shift your support for that person.
More demonstrations are planned later this week, but with no political solution in sight, many are concerned about the growing tensions on the ground. It is Tianshan, TRT World, Caracas.
Well, in the last hour, U.S. President Donald Trump has issued a tweet warning Americans not to travel to Venezuela. For more, let's speak to Diego Moyo Campos, a senior analyst at IHS Markit. Thanks so much for speaking to us. You know, the Chavistas rose to power in part believing the U.S. has not been a force for good in Latin America. It's ignored crushing poverty and corruption in order to further its own agenda on the continent. So, when Donald Trump ups the rhetoric and sanctions as he has, do you think it's good for Venezuela's opposition?
Well, what the U.S. is trying to do is basically align with the rest of Latin American countries in the region, including Brazil, Colombia, Peru, Argentina, Canada, the Group of Lima, and most EU countries in trying to impose sanctions against the administration of Nicolas Maduro, who has been involved in acts of corruption, human rights violations, and which his second mandate is not being recognized, and try to put pressure for free and fair elections to take place in Venezuela.
Okay. I mean, no one can deny that the pressure is mounting. It's been consistently building. But what do you think will ultimately change, particularly in the case of Venezuela's economy right now? It's not sustainable.
it's simply not sustainable. I mean, when Chavez came to power in 1999, oil production was at 3.4 million barrels per day. Oil is Venezuela's main source of revenue. 2 years ago, oil production stood at 2.4 million barrels per day. It has been reduced to a half. Oil production in Venezuela now stands at 1.2 million barrels per day, and we expect that oil production would fall at least 300,000 barrels per day this year. The economy is likely to contract at least 15%. Already the country is hyperinflation, and what this means in the streets for the people is shortages of food and basic goods, a collapse of the electricity grid, a collapse of water supplies, a collapse of the distribution of natural gas, which is what most Venezuelans use to cook. And certainly with Maduro in control of government functions, there's little room that for a change of direction. It's highly unlikely that investors will go back to Venezuela and that the conditions will be there to increase oil production and bring the country back into a path of economic prosperity. Now, with the international community recognizing this interim administration of Juan Guaidó, who basically assumed an interim presidency according to Article 233 of the Constitution, which basically says that if there's no president, I mean, if there's a vacuum of power, in this case, because Nicolás Maduro's administration is not being recognized because of fraud in elections allegations, right, then the head of the National Assembly, Juan Guaidó, needs to step in and call for elections, and that's, I think, what's in the card. A call for free and fair elections and for Venezuelans to vote freely.
And, interestingly enough, I mean, Maduro has agreed to hold new parliamentary elections, not change the president, but parliamentary elections. What do you think is behind that? Could it change the political dynamics, or would Maduro's people be gambling on actually being able to get more support through a fresh parliamentary vote?
The problem with Maduro is that he and the ruling party are not popular enough to go to an electoral process, I mean, free and fair elections, and win the vote. The National Assembly, the parliament, is currently in the hands of the opposition, and the opposition is unlikely to agree to Maduro's proposal unless he himself also steps down and there are free and fair elections. But the most important thing is, at the moment, there are no conditions for elections in Venezuela because the members of the electoral authority are all members of the ruling party. And without allowing international observers, we're going to see most likely the same situation that we saw in May last year, an election which is not recognized by the international community. So the only way to move forward is for Maduro to, in a way, allow for a new national electoral authority and for international observers so that Venezuelans can freely vote and decide their future. That's something that could be the result of a dialogue between Maduro and the ruling party and Guaidó and the opposition. If that happens, we could see some light at the end of the tunnel. So far, it's good that at least this exit option is being proposed and could serve as a Babel's cave to potential political violence in the country. Hopefully.
Diego Moya Ocampos, thanks so much for joining us there. We appreciate it. Well, after 2 years of negotiations and months of saying her deal is the only deal, the British Prime Minister is off to seek a new Brexit arrangement with the EU. The British Parliament has given Theresa May a mandate to seek further concessions on the issue of the Irish border. But the EU has repeatedly said the withdrawal agreement will not be renegotiated. Sarah Morris went to Dover, a very pro-Brexit town, to find out what residents there are thinking.
The famed White Cliffs of Dover mark the UK's closest point to Europe, standing just 33 kilometres from France. They also flank the town of Dover, which is one of the biggest Brexit-supporting regions in Britain. 62% of voters here opted to leave the European Union in the 2016 referendum. And some locals are very unimpressed by the way politicians are handling the Brexit negotiations.
It's a disaster, really. We're the laughingstock of Europe. Probably the world.
There's all these politicians that are all, lying to us.
Others have suspicions the politicians secretly don't want Brexit to happen, so are deliberately frustrating the divorce proceedings.
They're thinking about, comfortable jobs afterwards, positions afterwards. They're not really thinking about the people or the effects. And that's partly why people voted Brexit, because they felt they're not listened to.
At the heart of Dover is its busy port. On average, just under 7,000 trucks pass through here each day, transporting goods to and from Europe. But after Brexit, their journey may not be so smooth. If there is a no-deal Brexit and suddenly customs checks and tariffs apply to the goods arriving here at the port on these trucks, then government modelling predicts there will be gridlock, with the possibility of traffic jams spanning 27 kilometres. For people here in Dover, that means getting to school or work or even hospital could become very difficult. But plenty of Brexit supporters in town think those warnings are just scaremongering.
There'll probably be some difficulties, but not the chaos and the doom that's predicting.
The once thriving town has fallen on hard times. Shops are shutting and jobs are hard to come by. But there's optimism that Brexit, even a no-deal Brexit, may in fact reinvigorate the town.
We're in a good position to do this. Remember, Dover was the first place to receive a bomb in the First World War. It was Hellfire Corner in the Second World War. It's where the Herald of Free Enterprise disaster was in '87. We're not far from where the Deal bombing was in '89. People here are tough, and they will face the situation. They will do the best they can, and they will overcome it.
As a port, Dover has a lot to lose from Brexit, but this area, known as the gateway to Europe, remains determined to pull up the drawbridge. Sarah Morris, TRT World, Dover.
Well, our Europe correspondent Simon McGregor-Wood is in London. He puts his money on the UK requesting an extension for the current March 29th Brexit deadline.
As it stands at the moment, legally, this country will leave the European Union on the 29th of March, with or without a deal. Something needs to happen to make sure that doesn't happen. There are signs within the House of Commons. A majority of MPs will do anything they can to prevent the government taking this country out without a deal, but no doubt it remains a distinct possibility. So in Europe, in the UK, businesses are getting increasingly nervous. Do I think that eventually, in this game of chicken, if you like, the British Prime Minister will ask the European Union for an extension to buy more time? I think that's almost inevitable, because as things stand, if by some extraordinary act of magic a deal was agreed in the next few days, it's not going to happen in the next few days, of course, and it was brought back to the House of Commons and they agreed. Even if all of that happened, there simply wouldn't be time to convert that treaty, that new deal, into British law in time for March the 29th. That is simply not going to happen. So if I was a betting man, I'm not, I would put £5 or €5 on this country at some point in the next few weeks asking for an extension of March the 29th to be 2 or 3 months, to allow more time to these negotiations to play out.
Well, in the United States, it is forecast to get so cold that people have been warned to avoid taking deep breaths while outside and to talk as little as possible. Temperatures in the Midwest could go as low as minus 53 degrees Celsius. In Chicago, it's likely to be colder than Antarctica. The bitter conditions are being created by a polar vortex, which is a weather system that normally spins around the North Pole. And in Chicago, there are reports of people being held at gunpoint for their coats, but these workers are in Iowa, and they've found that a freezer is a good place to keep warm. Employees at a cold storage site have been taking shelter in the freezers that are minus 10 centigrade inside, while outside it's minus 50 with the wind chill factor. Well, Danny Spiewak has more from Minneapolis, Minnesota.
By Minnesota standards, this is really cold. We're talking about historic wind chills and historic air temperatures here in the Twin Cities. Could have wind chills approaching negative 50. To put that in perspective for you, the historical context could be some of the coldest temperatures we've seen in this region in years, dating back to 1996. So even in a region accustomed to this type of weather, even this is really cold and really dangerous. That's why you've had a lot of people here at the airport sprinting to their taxis and their Ubers to limit the amount of time they have to spend, even the seconds, getting into the warm car. It is that dangerous here in the state of Minnesota and in the Twin Cities specifically. We've had a lot of schools that have closed over the next couple of days already, a lot of businesses that are closing down early, bars and restaurants that are closing. You're looking at wind chills and temperatures that are just plain dangerous at this point. They're coping here in the Twin Cities, haven't had any snow here today and not forecasted here for the next couple of days. Just extremely cold, and people are just going to have to get through it for the next 48 hours or so. In the Twin Cities, I'm Danny Spiewak.
Well, the UN Special Rapporteur leading an inquiry into the killing of Saudi journalist Jamal Khashoggi is expected to meet his fiancée in Istanbul. Hatice Cengiz is considered a vital witness in the case. She was with Khashoggi on October 2nd when he entered and disappeared inside the Saudi consulate in Istanbul. TRT World's Ubay Shabandar joins us from outside the Saudi consulate with more. Hi, Ubay. First, clarify, if you will, how much of an international investigation this really is. Agnes Callamard is actually compiling a report to decide whether or not the UN should call for an investigation when this is complete in June, correct?
That's absolutely true. Agnes Callamard is the special representative for the United Nations when it comes to extrajudicial executions and killings. Now, she's hoping to compile a report for the Human Rights Council in Geneva that would eventually be made public sometime in May or June of this year. She's trying to get more evidence, more information. She's here in Turkey for a week-long visit alongside a forensic and legal team. Now, she has asked for access to the Saudi consulate here by Saudi officials. She's yet to receive that access. She's waiting for permission from the Saudi government. She has said that in their defense, the Saudis received that request rather late. So in the meantime, she's meeting with Saudi investigative journalists. She's trying to get more information on the full scope of what happened in the brutal murder of Jamal Khashoggi and his subsequent dismemberment of his body that happened in the consulate right there behind me. More information has yet to be revealed, according to some skeptics, on the full account of the authorization on who gave the order to kill Jamal Khashoggi, while the Saudi government has said that it has detained the individuals behind the physical killing. Many skeptics believe that there are actually more information to be discovered, specifically on who gave that order, and some are hoping that Agnes Callamard will provide that international oversight that could possibly reveal even more information on the killing of Jamal Khashoggi. In the meantime, she's waiting for that access by the Saudi government into the consulate.
Okay. Ubay, we'll leave it there for now. Thank you for that. Outside the Saudi consulate there in Istanbul. Well, the United States has made a formal request to Canada for the extradition of Huawei's chief financial officer. Meng Wanzhou was arrested in Canada in December at Washington's request. She's accused of evading U.S. sanctions on Iran through a hidden company created by Huawei. On Monday, the U.S. announced more than 20 criminal charges against the Chinese tech giant, including bank fraud, stealing trade secrets, and obstruction of justice. Now, Beijing says the charges are politically motivated. Well, the charges against Huawei and its CFO come as China and the U.S. resume trade talks. Those are seen as critical to avoiding an escalation of a trade war that already involves hundreds of billions of dollars in products. Patrick Falk has more from Beijing.
In China, the Spring Festival is approaching. The trade war may have dampened sentiment among consumers over the past year, but retailers like this design store are still aiming to capitalize on seasonal buying.
People will be visiting homes as guests and bring gifts as a symbol of friendship.
Retail sales growth in China slowed to 9% in 2018, down from 9.4% the year before. Still, research suggests the country will outpace the US to become the world's largest consumer of goods in 2019. And it should be by quite a margin. Research firm eMarketer predicts Chinese retail sales will top those of the US by more than $100 billion.
And that's giving some in China reason to downplay the long-term effects of the trade war. At the World Economic Forum in Davos last week, Alibaba CEO Daniel Zhang noted that China has 1 billion consumers, and so long as conditions are right, he said, it can be a self-sufficient market.
China's top trade negotiator, Liu He, faces a daunting task over the next 2 days. He'll try to secure a deal acceptable to both Beijing and Washington. US demands for China to implement deep structural reforms and end the alleged forced transfer of technology are key sticking points. Criminal charges against China's telecoms powerhouse Huawei and its founder's daughter have further complicated the talks. Should they fail to deliver a breakthrough, China will have to rely on itself to pave a way forward for its economy. Authorities have already unveiled new policies to help drive consumption. More stimulus measures are expected to be rolled out during the annual parliamentary sessions in March, but maintaining solid growth may require a bigger shake-up.
You know, people talk about the supply side reform, right? Which is actually to look at how to reform the structure of the economy. One thing is to reduce the role of investments. The second thing is to reform the state-owned enterprises, so that you don't have so much inefficiency built into the system. I think once these things get fixed, then you would have more demand.
And getting it right could ensure China continues to prosper, no matter the outcome of the trade war. Patrick Falk, TRT World, Beijing.
Well, for more, let's speak to TRT World's Lionel Donovan, who joins us now live from Washington. Hi, Lionel. So these charges against Huawei and its CFO, how much could they influence or actually be used as a weapon of sorts in these trade talks going forward now?
Well, these charges can be used as somewhat of a bargaining chip in the trade war between the U.S. and China, according to President Trump. Trump has said that he would be willing to intervene in the Huawei case if it meant that he would be able to get he would be able to get a better deal with China. Now, this, of course, has drawn criticism from those within his own party and intelligence officials as well, because you have the Treasury Secretary saying that these two incidents are separate, but it's hard to see how these two incidents could be separate given the context of the situation. For these charges to be announced just 2 days before the Chinese delegation comes to Washington to discuss trade talks does make it hard to believe that this could be taken away from the larger fight between the United States and China regarding trade. Now, Huawei's connections with the Chinese government are extensive and well known, and various intelligence officers have said that Huawei's products could be used by Beijing in order to spy on American companies and American citizens themselves. So I would imagine that these charges will have a significant impact on the talks that will be taking place here in Washington between the Chinese delegation and U.S. officials.
It's funny, they actually boost China's claims that the charges are politically motivated. But let me ask you, Lionel, Canada willingly or unwillingly has been pulled into this dispute. So how badly has the China-Canada relationship been hit?
Well, the relationship between China and Canada has taken a significant hit because of these talks. Canada is the one that arrested the CFO, Meng Wanzhou, and they're currently in extradition hearings in order to get Meng to the U.S. Now, China has responded to this, saying that the charges and the arrest they were something that they did not agree with, and in response, they actually resentenced a Canadian citizen who was held on drug smuggling charges to death, and that is something that has been condemned by Canada and the U.S. So this is just some of the spillover that has taken place between the fight in the fight between U.S. and Canada, and I would imagine that it will continue until there is some sort of resolution in regards to trade between China and the U.S.
Okay, Lionel Donovan, we'll leave it there for now. Thanks for that. Live from Washington. Well, 2 people have been killed, 4 others wounded after a grenade was thrown into a mosque in the southern Philippines. The attack took place in Zamboanga City, near the Muslim-majority region of Mindanao, that recently voted for autonomy. Now, it's unclear if there's any connection to Sunday's bombing of a cathedral that killed at least 20 people. No one has claimed responsibility for that grenade attack. Last Saturday, the PKK terror group attacked a Turkish military base in northern Iraq. TRT World correspondent John Hassasu has been to the Iraqi town near that base.
We went to the border town of Sheladiza in the northern Iraqi city of Duhok. Local people told us that we were the first international journalists to visit the town after what happened on Saturday. The situation was calm and people got back to their daily life. Local Kurdish authorities didn't want to comment on the incident, saying that there is nothing to add on Prime Minister Nechirvan Barzani's words, who blamed the PKK terror group as the main cause of the cross-border Turkish airstrikes. Local authorities see the incident as a provocation created by the PKK members, and they started an investigation to find out who were behind the attack. At the same time, we saw that the Kurdish security forces taking measures around the Turkish army base to avoid any similar incident. It is a very sensitive issue for the Kurdish people here, I must say. They don't want to be victims in the fight between the Turkish army and the PKK terrorists, since the Iraqi army doesn't have the power to get the PKK militia out of its borders. It can't really stop Turkish army from defending itself either. And the local people are hoping that the Kurdish authorities of Iraq will handle this delicate problem without letting it go any further.
Now, according to Turkish officials, some PKK attacks in Turkey are coordinated and carried out from Iraq. Yusuf Erim tells us more about the PKK threat coming from northern Iraq.
The Turkish military launched a cross-border operation called Tigris Shield in March last year. Turkish forces have gone as far as 20 kilometers into northern Iraq in an advance that aims to clear PKK elements from Turkey's borders. The PKK was founded in Turkey, but it has set up its main base of operations in the Kandil Mountains, straddling the Iraq-Iran border. The mountainous terrain makes the region an ideal hideout for the terror group. The PKK uses the Kandil Mountains as a transit hub between Iraq, Iran, Syria, and Turkey. The group moves terrorists and weapons through these transit networks to coordinate attacks against Turkey. They also coordinate drugs trafficking from Kandil and oversee its distribution in Europe. According to the Turkish Interior Ministry, the drugs trade brings the terror group $1.5 billion in income every year. So, in an effort to address these threats, the Turkish military has set up at least 11 military bases in northern Iraq and regularly conducts cross-border strikes on PKK positions.
Yusuf Erim there. Now, for some, the idea of a half marathon is daunting enough, but those looking for an even more extreme challenge may have found their match in northeast China. More than 1,100 runners participated in this year's China Jingpo Lake International Ice Race. It's the first competition of its kind to feature a racetrack made entirely of ice. Runners ready to brave the freezing temperatures and slippery course could choose from the 5-kilometer or half-marathon races. Leave you with these images. Kim's up next with Newsfeed. Stay with us.
When the week is over, it's time to put the headlines in a wider perspective. At Playback, we rewind the week's biggest stories from around the world. We provide a focused look back with exclusive reports, in-depth analysis, and compelling interviews. Playback, putting the headlines in wider perspective. Playback on TRT World.
The Ebola outbreak was first reported in March
10,000 people have died. The Ebola virus is still rife. The virus has rapidly become one of the deadliest diseases in the world.
Imagine what it would be like to lose all the mountains in the world. Once it's gone, it's gone.
And we really have to start changing our behavior. Otherwise, this will be all water really soon.
In an ever-changing world where fact is mixed with fiction and there's competition to control the narrative, The Nexus brings you reporting and debate that's in-depth, insightful and intelligent. Yes, all of that, but also this.
I'm doing this for the rest of the world.
And it's asinine for you to ask that kind of question.
Excuse me, you spoke, I'm speaking. Stop, I'm speaking now.
They don't know Jack.
Matthew, do I look like a yes woman to you?
Absolutely not.
Nexus on TRT World.
Hi there, I'm Kim, taking you through some of the things people are talking about and the stuff they're sharing around the world on Newsfeed today. A polar vortex descends on the US, sending 55 million people into below zero temperatures. Meanwhile, heat for Mariah Carey, who's taking on a gig in Saudi. We'll tell you how you can pay to crash the best kind of wedding, an Indian wedding. And Instagrammers letting their Team Meghan or Team Kate flags fly are turning nasty, and Buckingham Palace needs help. A record-breaking cold snap is moving in on the US. In the Midwest, it's expected to be colder than Antarctica. It sounds bone-chilling for those having to suffer through it. And more than that, it has the potential to be deadly. American President Donald Trump has given his thoughts, tweeting that we need global warming. What now? Here's Ezra.
Bone-chilling cold is sweeping across the US.
Real temperatures, when combined with wind chill, may very well fall to extraordinarily dangerous levels.
Schools are shut, businesses are closed, flights are cancelled, and it's going to get worse.
While the snow may be ending, the cold is just starting.
States like North Dakota, Minnesota and Illinois know winter. But this time, it's expected to be colder than Antarctica.
Even 10 minutes of exposure may very well be harmful.
Even life-threatening, as temperatures could go as low as -46 degrees. It's caused by a polar vortex. That's freezing air from the North Pole sweeping across the Midwest. President Trump says he has a solution.
In the beautiful Midwest, wind chill temperatures are reaching -60 degrees, the coldest ever recorded. In coming days, expected to get even colder. People can't last outside even for minutes. What the hell is going on with global warming? I think he meant global warming. Please come back fast. We need you.
Scientists say it is global warming that's causing the freeze, but the exact opposite is happening in the southern hemisphere.
The record-breaking heatwave, which crippled parts of Victoria and South Australia, is now hitting Sydney, with temperatures in some parts to soar into the 40s.
A massive heatwave is taking over Australia and New Zealand, and everything there is melting away. So all this extreme weather talk is far from over.
Meanwhile, this is how Canadians deal with the wild weather. An accident on the icy roads caused a 75-car pileup near Montreal. There was no road rage here. Instead, to pass the time, they turned the highway into a hockey rink for a friendly game. The video has been watched and shared millions of times, always making the best of things, those Canadians. Indian weddings are a lavish, colourful affair, from the music to the jewellery to the fanfare. It's a celebration where Indian families spend big and usually pull out all the stops. Now, how would you feel if we told you it's possible to experience all of that by paying cash to crash an Indian wedding? Neha Punia explains.
For Nikki Delavia, this is a moment she can now tick off her bucket list. She's dancing in a barat, which is an Indian groom's wedding procession. Only she's not related to nor friends with anyone here. Nikki's paid $250 to crash this wedding.
So I saw it advertised on a current affairs show. The TV was just on and I happened to see it, and I've always been interested in coming to an Indian wedding but didn't have any Indian friends that were getting married, so I've always remembered it, and when I was planning to come to India, I remembered and emailed and tried to get it set up.
To make this happen, Nikki and her friend got in touch with the Australia-based startup Join My Wedding. It helps locals open up their weddings to foreigners for a price and gives tourists a chance to sample a quintessentially Indian experience. For the bride and groom, it was also a chance to break with tradition and do things differently.
So somehow I told my mother, and she was, kind of not liking it initially, but yeah, I made her convinced that this is gonna be, a new thing, and they will get to see the Indian cultures and probably, it will be a good event for us also.
The couple's family says they were initially skeptical about having strangers attend such an important event.
First, I wondered what they would be like, but it's worked out well. Everyone's liked it. They thought it was a different concept.
Nikki says the henna, the rich Indian food, the dancing, and the chance to don a 9-yard sari have helped her understand Indian culture better.
We don't have the same sort of ceremonies which have meaning and ritual behind them. We have very, I suppose, quite traditional type of weddings. Yeah.
Weddings in India can cost from anything between $15,000 all the way up to millions of dollars. It's usually down to the bride's family to pay, but it would take a large amount of foreign guests paying $250 each to make a real difference to the funding of these events. For the bride and groom, this is a cultural exchange and one they'd like to see the other side of.
I would love to see an Australian wedding or other nationality wedding. I've never seen. I think I've only seen the Punjabi wedding. So I would love to see their side also.
While Sonu may have to wait to snag an invite to an Australian wedding, she says Nikki's attendance to hers has been more than welcome.
Okay, let's have a look now at some other things that caught our eye on social media. They make up 2% of the world's population and have been a source of inspiration for artists for decades. And now redheads are being celebrated with an exhibition in Paris. Curators say redheads have been portrayed in various ways over the years, from violent to seductive and everything in between. But now it's time to celebrate their role as muses and subjects in art over the decades. If you're in Paris, check it out. It's sure to be fiery. Celebs, they're just like us, kind of. British actor Richard E. Grant, you might know him from Downton Abbey. Well, back when he was just 14, he sent a letter to Barbra Streisand. He said he was a huge fan and offered Streisand a holiday at his family home in Swaziland to escape the pressures of fame. Fast forward 47 years, still a big fan, he tracked down her home, took a selfie outside and posted it his teenage letter to his Twitter. That adorable tweet finally caught the attention of Barbra Streisand, who thanked him for the letter and says she loved his latest film. Sounds like the beginning of a beautiful friendship. Even royals get trolled, and even royals need help dealing with it. The Duchesses of Sussex and Cambridge, also known as Kate and Meghan, have been faced with increasingly vitriolic hate speech online, apparently fueled by reports that the two women are feuding. The British press is now urging social media users to tone down their criticism after reports Buckingham Palace has gone to Instagram and Twitter asking for their help to monitor online comments. Aides reportedly spend hours each week moderating comments and removing racist and sexist comments. Singer Mariah Carey is coming under fire for her upcoming show in Saudi Arabia. Online, people are criticising her decision to perform in the secretive emirate, and given its human rights record and jailing of women's rights activists. Take a look at this. No surprise then, the tickets are apparently only $80. OK, let's go around the world now for some other stories you need to know this Wednesday. Embattled Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro has issued a direct warning to US President Donald Trump, telling him to keep his hands off Venezuela. Maduro made the rare move of speaking in English to throw a shot at Trump, laying blame for the instability and violence in the country directly at the American president's feet.
Y le digamos a Donald Trump con Venezuela, no te metas. Hand off Venezuela. Donald Trump, hands off Venezuela. De inmediati.
Now, for all his claims of innocence, it seems that Mexican drug lord El Chapo is struggling to back it up with actual evidence. Joaquin Guzman is on trial facing more than a dozen criminal counts, including drug trafficking and conspiring to murder his rivals. But after the prosecution called 56 witnesses, taking up 11 weeks of the jury's time, El Chapo's lawyer came back with just one witness, with his testimony lasting a measly half hour. The jury will hear closing arguments on Wednesday. The youngest follower of cult leader Charles Manson wants out of prison and will seek parole for a third time. Leslie Van Houten was 19 when she murdered Leno Bianca and his wife Rosemary in Los Angeles. She had joined Manson's cult, living at an abandoned movie ranch with him, where he told his followers there would be a race war. Manson and others then killed 5 people at one home in LA, while Van Houten and others killed Bianca and his wife at a different address. A state panel says Van Houten, who is now 69 years old, has been a model inmate, earning a master's degree in counselling while inside. The internet is awash with well wishes for Empire star Jussie Smollett. The 35-year-old was attacked on Tuesday by 2 suspects who yelled out racist and homophobic slurs. That's according to police. He then had a chemical substance poured on him and a rope put around his neck. Stars and fans alike have been posting their support online for the actor. It's reported Smollett has now been discharged from hospital. Malaysia has been stripped of its hosting rights for the upcoming 2019 World Para Swimming Champs after Malaysia said it would not allow Israeli athletes to compete. The event is a qualifier for the Tokyo 2020 Paralympics and was seen by Malaysia as its only way of condemning Israel's treatment of Palestinians.
For Malaysia, they are coming from a criminal country and we cannot accept them. From a country which does not obey international laws. You find that this country just does what it likes, including building settlements in other people's country and excluding the people of that country from entering their settlement.
An international event is more important than safeguarding the interests of our Palestinian brothers and sisters who have been mutilated times after times again. If that is more important, that means we have lost our moral conscience and moral compass.
To animals doing stuff. Australian animals are just weird and terrifying. One man caught the moment this huge 3.5-metre saltwater crocodile, that's the deadly kind, landed in front of his car on the Bruce Highway. Floods in the northern state of Queensland have caused rivers to swell and crocs to end up in unlikely places that they wouldn't normally be exploring. Rightly so, the driver was not game to get out of his car. And in the south of Australia, where there's an extreme heat wave, this wallaby knows how to stay cool. It surprised onlookers by showing off some strokes before hopping out of the water to dry off. He might soon be back in as the heat wave continues into February. Oh, my word, he's very cute, though. Oof. Well, that's all from the Newsfeed team. Reach out to me with your questions, comments, complaints, hopefully not too many of those, and suggestions at Kim Vanel. You'll find us 24/7 on Twitter and YouTube, and you can follow me on Instagram. Follow, subscribe, and we'll see you tomorrow. Well, that was a look at the news on social media. Now here's Oscar with what's happening in business. Oscar, drama with the markets in reaction to the latest Brexit drama.
That's right, Kim. Thank you for that. The markets seem to be holding up for now. That's after the UK Parliament voted to change the course of Brexit by ordering Prime Minister Theresa May to reopen negotiations with the European Union. Now, London's FTSE is rallying as May faces an unenviable task. She now has to go back to Brussels in the next couple of days to renegotiate the Irish backstop provision of the Brexit deal. In high-end fashion stocks across the region are also up after strong results from the French luxury group LVMH, defying concerns over the slowdown in China. Over in Asia, the markets closed mixed as investors anxiously wait for the latest round of US-China trade talks that are due to begin later on Wednesday. Hopes of a breakthrough are fading, though, after the US filed criminal charges against the Chinese telecoms giant Huawei. Hong Kong's Hang Seng was one of the few bright spots in the region. US stock futures are in positive territory ahead of Wall Street's opening bell as investors eagerly await the US Federal Reserve's first interest rate announcement of the year. The Fed raised rates 4 times last year, but growing concerns about a slowing US economy are expected to keep a lid on future increases. And the British pound is recovering against the major currencies after falling sharply in the wake of the UK Parliament's latest Brexit vote. It's currently stronger against the euro and the dollar, while the euro is weaker against the greenback. Well, let's get more on the markets now from Victoria Scholar, who joins us now from London. She's a market analyst at IG Group. Good to have you back on the program, Victoria. So we're seeing stock markets in London rally as well as the British pound. Why are they up in the face of the latest Brexit developments?
Well, essentially, the pound is in recovery mode, as you pointed to in your introduction there. That's after it slumped by more than 1% late last night, and that's helping to spur the FTSE 100, driven by those big international stocks, the likes of British American Tobacco and Diageo, which report their earnings in US dollars, which means that a weaker pound is actually good for them.
Interesting. And as I mentioned, the latest round of US-China trade talks are due to kick off later today. What are investors hoping will come of that?
Well, I mean, this is obviously a key issue for the markets right now. The US Trade Representative Robert Lighthizer will be meeting with the US Vice Premier today in these 2-day talks. Remember, we're in the middle of this 90-day ceasefire, which comes to an end on the 2nd of March. The US looking to reduce that trade deficit with China. That's probably the easy part. The difficult part is that it wants protection over its intellectual property and forced technology transfer from the US to China. So it'll be looking for possible movement around those issues. Whether or not we'll actually see that, we'll have to wait and see. Of course, we'll be paying very close attention to Mr. Trump's Twitter feed.
And just a quick question about Brexit again. So Theresa May, as I mentioned, is now off to Brussels to try and renegotiate her deal. The EU, minutes after the UK Parliament voted, said it wasn't going to change the deal. What are investors hoping from those developments?
Well, it was interesting last night because there was this amendment rejecting a no-deal Brexit that was put on the table, and it was passed through a vote in Parliament. But crucially, it was non-binding, which means that a no-deal Brexit remains on the table. Goldman Sachs, in fact, raised its probability of us so-called crashing out without a deal from 10 to 15% after the vote last night. Theresa May in an unenviable position, going back to Brussels with the view to try and renegotiate that withdrawal a deal. But remember, we've been hearing from a number of EU leaders, the likes of Donald Tusk, saying that they're not willing to do that. So the question really is whether that's a negotiating tactic from the European side.
Yes, all eyes will be on Theresa May as she heads to Belgium in the next couple of days. Victoria Scholar in London, thank you as always. Now to other top stories from around the world. The French economy grew 0.3% in the fourth quarter, beating forecasts. The growth was boosted by a 2.4% jump in exports, despite stagnant household spending. France's central bank cut its growth forecasts for the fourth quarter to 0.2% last month due to anti-government yellow vest protests. The world's largest iron ore miner, Vale, says it's cutting around 10% of its annual output. The announcement comes after one of its waste dams collapsed in Brazil, killing at least 84 people, with hundreds still missing. Vale will be temporarily suspending operations in around 10 dams to decommission them over the next 3 years, costing the company around $1.3 billion. And Turkey's central bank has lowered its year-end inflation target to 14.6%, down from the previous 15.2%. The downward revision comes after improved inflation figures and the strengthening of the lira since last year's crash. The inflation forecast for 2020 was also cut to 8.2%, down from 9.3%. And you can tune in to Money Talks at 17:30 GMT for more analysis of the latest Brexit developments and other business and economic news happening today. Robin Adams is standing by with the latest in sport now. Robin, a growing campaign to free the refugee footballer currently in Thailand.
It is ongoing, and we have been reporting quite extensively on that. Oscar, thank you very much. Hello there. It is now day 65 of Hakeem Al Arabi's detention in a Thai prison, and the campaign, as you've just been hearing, to get the refugee footballer released continues. Now, FIFA, the IOC, the Asian Football Confederation, they're all lobbying the Thai authorities to release the player who has asylum in Australia. The refugee footballer was locked up while on honeymoon in Thailand in November. His wife has written to the Thai country's Prime Minister pleading for his release. Bahrain wants him extradited. Now, former Australia football captain Craig Foster, who's been campaigning as well tirelessly for Al Arabi's release, joins us now from Switzerland. Good to see you. I mean, can you just give us an update very quickly on where we are with the situation with Hakeem Al Arabi?
Okay, so as you said, there's a lot of major sports, governmental and NGO organisations around the world who've lent their public support now. There's incredible international campaign and condemnation of the actions of both Thailand and Bahrain, and that's very important here, that people realise Bahrain are trying to extradite, or we'd say refoul, a refugee contrary to international law, and Thailand are in many ways doing their bidding, and he should be simply released. The talk is from Thailand over the last few weeks about a potential legal case, an extradition order, but all of that's erroneous. Under international law, Hakeem should simply be immediately released back to his wife in Australia, who I'm sure is incredibly missing, given that he hasn't seen her for almost 2 months. He's in a very low emotional state. We're all really feel for him. I think people of compassion and conscience anywhere around the world would recognise that this is a psychological torture of a young man. He's only 25. He is a torture survivor already. And everyone, an immense powerful coalition is calling on the Thai Prime Minister to just let him go.
Craig,
where is the case at now? The Thai government has to decide only in the next couple of days whether they are going to continue with this case into the justice system of Thailand. The Australian government, FIFA, IOC, and all of us are calling on them not to do so. It's unfair, it's unnecessary. You simply need to let him go on the basis that the extradition order is a politically motivated campaign, and also the international condemnation and result on the reputation of Thailand is extremely negative, and all they need to do really now is make that decision to let him go home.
Absolutely appreciate that updates and look forward to more from you, Craig Foster, former Australian football captain. Thank you very much. After dispatching host the UAE comfortably 4-0, Qatar will be looking to win the Asian Cup for the very first time in the competition's history, though Asian football analyst Scott McIntyre says they have more to worry about than just beating Japan.
It's not often the case in tournament play, but the Asian Cup has seemingly thrown up the ideal match, with the only two nations to have won all 6 of their games set to clash in the Asian Cup final. Qatar, under the guidance of Spanish coach Felix Sanchez, who has worked in the nation since way back in 2006, are the only country still yet to concede a single goal at the tournament. They've also scored more than any other nation, 16. But as impressive as the forthcoming World Cup hosts have been at both ends of the pitch, there are some questions starting to be raised over the eligibility of a couple of their players to represent the nation, including Iraqi-born defender Bassam Al-Rawi and Sudanese-born striker Al-Muiz Ali, the tournament's leading scorer. And it's very much a case of watch this space on that front.
And over in England, Newcastle have thrown a proper spanner in the works and dented Manchester City's title hopes. Newcastle fans will no doubt remember Tuesday, 29 January 2019, for a very long time. The home side finding themselves trailing after just 24 seconds at St James Park through Sergio Aguero, and then 2 second-half goals from Rondon and Richie, ensuring the victory for Newcastle, who are now up to 14th with that result. Cardiff City were also in action, a somber mood around the ground. Fans brought tributes and raised yellow cards in honour of their new signing, Emiliano Sala, who's been missing since Monday last week. The teams gathered at the centre circle before kick-off to hold a minute of remembrance for the Argentinian striker. Both managers commented afterwards that the game had been difficult and emotional.
What's gone on this week and unprecedented, really. But we spoke about it before the kick-off, and that we ought to, for Emiliano, we ought to try and put a performance in. I know people would expect us to lay down, and but I thought, if anything, they just showed what they were made of tonight.
Last week, I am thinking maybe today cannot play, but the decision is continuing, finding Emiliano Sala, continuing the competition. And it's a very emotional match today.
Monaco's misery continues. They've been kicked out of the French League Cup. And this is just days after reinstalling Leonardo Jardim as coach after the firing of Thierry Henry. Monaco losing to Wangam on penalties in the semi-finals. This really was a game of missed chances. Monaco squandered a 2-goal lead, drew 2-2 at full-time. That was followed by a 5-4 defeat in the spot kick contest. Wangam will be facing either Strasbourg or Bordeaux in the final. Conor McGregor and Khabib Nurmagomedov have both received lengthy bans for the ugly scenes after their fight at UFC 229, I beg your pardon, in October. Nurmagomedov has been fined $500,000 and suspended for 9 months, while McGregor received a 6-month ban. He'll have to pay a $50,000 fine. Khabib's ban will be reduced by 3 months if he agrees to record an anti-bullying message for the Las Vegas Police Department. The bans will run from October 6th last year, the date of that showdown in Las Vegas. That is all your sport. I'll see you for Beyond the Game later.
No, it's much more important. Beyond the Game on TRT World.
Beyond the Game, brought to you by Turkish Airlines.
We are currently driving towards the incident.
We're reporting to you from the very heart of the story.
The cause of the explosion is unclear.
Smoke and debris. We do now have unconfirmed reports.
The number of casualties is rising as we speak. Here on the ground, there's a lot of commotion. Some of the eyewitnesses.
There's been a social
People are taking to social media outlets to discuss.
Reports of the explosion are now spreading like wildfire.